Welcome to Chapter 13 of the Krugman Microeconomics textbook, looking at perfect competition, introducing Mr. DARP, and the supply curve. Let's get right to it. Let's take a look at what you're going to learn in this chapter. First of all, we're going to look at the perfectly competitive industry, our last chapter on perfect competition. We're going to learn about price-taking producers and consumers, what determines profitability, and why some industries behave differently in the short run versus the long run. We're also going to look at what the industry supply curve actually looks like, what it means, how it is impacted in the short run, and also in the long run. And then we'll take a look at some graphical elements in terms of going from short run to long run, and from short run to long run back to short run, and then from long run to long run. So we'll take a look at all of those, and thank you for joining me. Let's first start off by taking a look at the different types of profit. This is kind of a review of what we talked about before, but just to keep in mind the idea of revenue, profit, if you will. Total revenue is price times quantity. So whatever you're selling it for times the quantity that you're selling is going to give you total revenue. But that's not necessarily going to give you profit because you need to take the total costs out of that total revenue in order to get to your profit. Now, we talked before about this idea of explicit and implicit costs. Explicit costs are the actual items in which we have receipts for, that are payments being paid by firms for using the resources that other people will give you in order to produce the products or services that you are selling. And things like this include rent, wages, materials, other bills along the way. Now, accounting profit is always going to be greater than economic profit because that's the profit that Uncle Sam taxes. The government actually taxes accounting profit, not economic profit. And economic profit in a lot of cases is either going to be zero or negative. Most cases negative, because of the fact that you're taking out implicit and explicit costs. So we get accounting profit by taking out accounting costs, those explicit costs, out of total revenue. That gives us the accounting profit. Now, with economic profit, we take out explicit and implicit, those things that are opportunity costs we have foregone because we decided to choose another option. So all of those things quickly add up to making economic profit negative, or a very, very, very small number as a result of what total revenue actually was. So that is going to be a much smaller number than accounting profit in terms of what we see there. Now, going forward, let's keep in mind that we're going to talk about economic costs. So the idea here, in terms of what we're looking at, all of these things are looking at explicit and implicit costs. That's what we're looking at as we move forward. We're kind of leaving accounting profit behind, and when we're looking at these costs, we're assuming economic costs, explicit and implicit in this particular example. So if the average cost of a pizza is $4, that would include explicit and implicit costs in the production of that pizza, and that's what we're looking at going forward. So this chapter is all looking at profit maximization. How do we maximize profit? And it's important to note that a lot of this, in terms of AP exam questions, come back to this concept of MR equals MC, marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Anytime you're looking at what quantity should be produced, what's the optimal output, how do we determine what the costs are versus what the profit is, it all comes back to MC equals MR, or MR equals MC. You're looking at the quantity at which you should produce. You're going to look at where the marginal cost meets the marginal revenue. That's going to give you the optimal quantity. That's going to give you price. It's going to give you total revenue. It's going to show you profit. All of those things are going to be determined from MC equals MR. So if you keep that concept in mind, for not just perfect competition, but when we get into imperfect competition later this week, you're going to see all of these are feeding on themselves in terms of where do we produce? Well, we produce at MC equals MR. That's our profit maximizing rule. Okay, so a machine analogy here. If we go to an ATM and it's going to give us $40 whenever we insert cash, but the only rule is we got to insert enough cash that is greater than what we gave the last time. So how much are we going to be willing to pay into the machine in order to get $40 every time? And then what are you not going to be willing to pay in terms of getting money out? And what does this tell us about maximizing profit? It's an important point to keep in mind because when we look at this, we are looking at, we're going to get $40 back. So if we know we're going to get $40 back, we're certainly not going to pay $40. There's no point to the transaction taking place. We're certainly not going to give more than $40 because we know we're only going to get $40. So initially, we would probably start pretty small. Maybe it's $1. And then maybe it's $2 and then $3, and we try and maximize it. To maximize our profit, we're going to go in as small increments as possible in order to make that happen. And that's profit maximization. That's the idea. We're trying to make sure that we minimize our costs in such a way that we maximize our profit. And that's how businesses make money, right? So if every unit is sold for $10, which unit is going to maximize profit? And how can we use marginal analysis to explain why we should never produce 5 units? Well, as you can see, we don't want to go to a point where we are going to, our marginal cost is going to exceed our marginal revenue. And there comes the profit maximization model. So we would only go to 4 units because MC, marginal cost, equals marginal revenue, MR, at 4. So we maximize our profit at 4 items being produced at that $10. If every unit can be sold for $10, then that's going to be our maximizing revenue. If the marginal costs exceed that, we're certainly not going to make 5 of them because we're going to lose money. So we're going to produce at MC equals MR, and that's going to give us the quantity of 4 that we see there. Now, what's the goal of every business? As I said, it's to make money and to maximize profits. So they're going to do that where they find MC equals MR, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So the idea here is we can look all day at the different types of revenue that's going to be produced at different cost points and different revenue points on this particular model. Should we produce another unit if the additional cost of another unit is $5 or $9 or $11? And we can go back to this model. But again, we're going to, no matter how the numbers change, we're going to produce it where MC equals MR. That is the profit maximizing rule. MR, marginal revenue, equals marginal cost. That is going to be our optimal output rule. That's where we are maximizing profit in so doing. Now, what we're looking at for now is this idea of short run in terms of whether we should produce at all, and then we'll look at long run decisions as we get further along. So the question that always comes up first is, well, should we produce or should we shut down? Are we not making enough money? And a lot of businesses are in this situation right now where they're trying to figure out, do we have to close our doors? And this leads to what we call the shutdown rule. And the shutdown rule is simply this: if you cannot cover your AVC, okay, if you're continuing to produce and your price is above AVC, then you will continue to produce, okay? If it falls below AVC, then you should shut down, at least in the short run, until you can reorganize and kind of fix your losses. If you are at AVC, the idea there is that you would continue to stay open because you can at least cover your variable costs. And then you can renegotiate the fixed costs in the long run. You're stuck in them, but so are they. So you'll find ways to minimize your losses, renegotiate, and find ways to hopefully stay in business. But if you're not meeting the variable costs, then that's a bigger issue, because that means you're not meeting fixed costs, you're not meeting variable costs. You've got problems, and so shutting down, at least in the short term, is a better solution, and that's where bankruptcy in a lot of these companies comes in. And the idea here is, if you are at minimum AVC, that is our shutdown point. Okay, so the idea here, and this leads us to our key graph that we're looking at here. If the market price is below the firm's AVC, then you should shut down because your AVC is higher. Okay, if you can cover only part of your variable costs, then that means you're not going to be able to cover all of them, and you're certainly not going to cover anything else. So you can't renegotiate when there's just too many bills to pay, and so shutting down is the better option there in terms of making that happen. Now, if you meet AVC, again, the idea there is that you're at least able to pay all of your AVC. Then you're at zero economic profit. In terms of AVC, you're still losing money, mind you, so it's not really zero economic profit. But in terms of meeting your AVC, you're able to at least cover those costs. Then you can keep your doors open. Otherwise, you would be in shutdown condition in terms of what we're seeing here. So as the price increases, quantity produced increases, and we see here that depending on where we are on the scale, in meeting AVC, which is the green curve that we see here, if our price was, what is it, $15? If it was at $15, we would be able to stay open. If the price was beneath that, if it was $10 or $5, we would be in shutdown condition because we could not meet our AVC. Now, if price is above that, that's great because that means you're making more money than you need to cover. But that's what shutdown condition is looking at. And that's very important to keep in mind. Now, what that tells us is that everything above AVC then is going to be on the marginal cost curve is going to be what we call our supply curve. If you remember, supply curve is upward sloping. That rule still applies. Now, the marginal cost curve above AVC is our supply curve. And the question I always get is, well, why isn't it below AVC? Well, because again, we're in shutdown if we're below it. So only above AVC and upward sloping would be your marginal cost or your supply curve. And again, everything above AVC at that point on the marginal cost curve would be your short run supply curve. And we'll see some examples of that coming up. Okay, so in looking at this then, if in this case, your variable costs are increasing. Think of it like a per unit tax, if you will. And so supply curve is shifting leftward, leading to a shift in the marginal cost. Notice your supply is decreasing when your marginal cost increases. It's going to change the game in terms of where your AVC is. Depending on where your price is, that's going to determine whether you're in shutdown condition. Because if that price doesn't go up, and then you could be in shutdown in that capacity. So here, if your price is $15 and all of a sudden a per unit tax is added, well, that could very well put you out of business. That could very well put you out of business because now the price is below AVC. You're not able to meet your AVC anymore. So if the price was $20 and the tax led you to being in that situation, you would still be in shutdown condition once that tax is imposed. If you were at $25, then you'd be meeting AVC. You could keep your doors open. You could renegotiate based on that. Likewise, if there was a subsidy included and the marginal cost curve, because of the subsidy, is shifting, or the supply curve shifting outward or rightward, it's leading to a drop in the AVC. And so at this point, if you were, making $20 and you were in shutdown, then you got the subsidy. Now your average variable cost has fallen. So marginal cost decreases, your supply increases. As a result of this, you're able to keep your doors open, so you wouldn't be in shutdown anymore. So those are two good examples of where government action does have an impact on whether or not you are in shutdown condition, whether you close or whether you keep your doors open. So that's a really important point to take a look at there when you're looking at does your business shut down or not. Now, what happens in the long run? Well, businesses close and they'll reorganize, and we've heard of this all the time. Sears did this, Kmart did this, Toys R Us did this for a while. And what they do in the short run is they try and renegotiate their leases, renegotiate their agreements with the people that they owe, with their debtors, and then try and emerge from that a company that can continue. Sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. But remember, the idea here is, and what you're going to see is that in the long run, people are going to enter and exit the market depending on if the market's making money. Okay, there are a lot of examples of people that have come in as a result of trying to make money in a situation where an industry is profiting, and they kind of eat up the remaining profits that are left over, and then everybody ends up making zero economic profit or break-even status. And that's kind of what we see there in a lot of cases. So there are very few barriers to entry for perfect competition because it is much easier to join and leave the market. So entry and exit is much easier as a result of what we see here in the long run. A market that has those lower barriers is going to have more competition. When they're making more profit, they're going to see people coming in and taking advantage of that by opening up The example I always use here is growing up, we used to see a proliferation of gas stations on every corner. Why? Because people are making a little bit of money off of gas, and so everybody wanted in on the action. The barrier was pretty low to open up a gas station. Just throw a tank in the ground and start selling gas. Very low barrier to entry. But what happens over time? People kind of come in and eat up the profits, and then everybody's breaking even, and so somebody's going to eventually have to leave the market in order for the remaining players to break even. And we'll take a look at a couple of graphs that address this. But if you have higher barriers in the marketplace, and many of these are, like I said, if you're in a monopoly or a natural monopoly, an electric cooperative, or a water company that is regulated by the government, those types of things have less competition. They're going to make more profit. And again, if they're regulated by the government, they're going to regulate that profit too. But higher barriers also means less competition. So if you're in an industry that has more patents or more intellectual property that you can rely on, then there's going to be less competition in that space. And so you're going to have more opportunities to make more profit and less competition to deal with along the way. Now, a great example of normal profit, if you think about this, is traffic. So if there's heavy traffic, why do all of the lanes go at the same speed? Well, because cars are switching lanes, trying to find a way to get there faster, right? And so they'll switch lanes, sometimes causing an accident, sometimes clogging up traffic even worse than they normally do. And why is that? So what happens as a result? Everybody gets there at the same time, right? There's very little change in terms of who's really getting there any faster. It makes you feel like you're getting there faster, and maybe you'll shave a few seconds off of your time, but everybody's pretty much getting there at the same pace. And we see the same thing with perfectly competitive markets. In terms of people trying to earn an economic profit, if there's a lot of players and they're making money, even more players jump in to basically eat up the profits. And basically what that means is, by eating up the profits, is everybody breaks even. Everybody comes back to zero economic profit or break-even status, or normal profit, if you will. And so there's nothing left over. So the players that do really well and continue to do that break-even status, maybe they're very passionate about the business, they stay in. But then when something happens, like a recession or something bad that shifts the supply curve or something like that, then all of a sudden you're going to see some players change. You're going to see people that can't survive. And so they will leave. And then again, because of the losses, they will leave the industry, and the players that are leaving the industry basically soak up all of the losses, and that leads us back to break even again. And we'll show you graphically in a moment how that takes place, because that does play a role here. Okay, so looking at perfect competition, and again, we're going to look very briefly at the other markets that we see here, and we'll look at those in subsequent chapters. The next 3 chapters are all about the imperfectly competitive markets that we're going to talk about here very briefly. Our focus in this chapter is really going to be on this first one, which is perfect competition. Okay, so looking at this, every product is bought and sold in a market that is considered in one of these 4 categories. You've got perfect competition. That's where we've been the entire semester. Monopolistic competition, we'll cover that in Chapter 16. We've got oligopoly, which we'll cover in Chapter 15, and then monopoly, which we'll cover in Chapter 14. And the idea here is all of these, in some way, shape, or form, may have varying levels of market power and a degree of whether they have more barriers to their particular industries. And you can see in the fast food market, or car manufacturers, or strawberries, or cereal, these are all different in terms of which market structures they are a part of. But what we're going to look at here is perfect competition. This is the idea of a commodity, something that is a good that could be bought by anybody, anywhere, and there's really no differentiation in the product. It's an identical product, perfect substitute, in that corn, for instance, could be sold very easily, or strawberries. And the idea is any farmer on a street corner or going to a local market could sell the same corn and strawberries for very different prices, but most of the time the prices are going to match, because if you try and sell them for more money, you're not going to sell them. Somebody's going to say, hey, I can get them for cheaper over there, and I'm going to go over there if you're not able to sell to me for those prices. So very low barriers to entry here. There's really no need to advertise because everybody is selling corn at the same price. So you are what's called a price taker, meaning you have no control over the price. You are essentially a price taker. Now let's look at the flip side of this, because the diametric opposite of a price taker is a price maker, and this is a monopoly. This is usually one firm. They have a very unique product. They have a very large barrier to entry and a lot of market power. If the government is regulating them, and in many cases they're not, but if the government is regulating them, it is impacting their profits. But we don't see that as much in monopoly as in natural monopoly. If there's like an electric cooperative or a water company or something like that, where the government has a vested interest in making sure that you make a little money, but not a lot. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the next chapter. The barriers to entry are depending on economies of scale. The idea here is that if you only have one electric company, the reason why there's only one is because of economies of scale. Who can really ramp up with all of the products and all of the technology and all the resources, the capital expenditures that you need in order to create an electric company? How can you do that and do that effectively if you have lots of competition? So you don't in this particular area. You have technology that is superior. You may have the government stepping in to create a barrier or helping you in that regard. But the idea is you have significant market power in this particular space. Now, if there's more than one monopoly in this space, we typically call this an oligopoly. And this is, there's a few producers that act like monopolies in that they have technological superiority, but they're not the only one in the market. They may be a couple of big players, and that's pretty much all there are. And their products may be identical or differentiated, meaning that they may be selling the same product as the other producers, or they may be differentiating it in some way, shape, or form. But in order to have an oligopoly, there's got to be a pretty high barrier to entry. You really don't have a lot of ease in which to accept new competitors in this space. And that's why they're price makers, just like monopolies are. Much more price makers because you have some interdependence on the other firms in terms of what your prices will be set. And again, we'll talk about this when we get to chapter 15. But the idea here is that you have a situation in which there's few players, they have significant market power, there are huge barriers to entry, and because of that, they can control their price, and they do it somewhat interdependently. Now, collusion is usually illegal. It is in this country and in many others, but there are other ways around that where they don't have to necessarily collude in order to be interdependent on market prices and being price makers there. And we'll talk more about that when we get to oligopoly. But the idea here is it is very different from perfectly competitive markets in that the players have significant market power. In perfect competition, you are a price taker, just like a consumer would be a price taker in perfect competition. And then the last one is monopolistic competition. And this is where you have a lot of differentiated products and a large number of sellers. Now, a good example of this, I always tell students, is really something like the mall. When we're at WJ and you want to go out to eat, there's only so many places you can get to in the time period you have, which isn't much, before the lunch period is over and you have to get back to fifth period class by 12 o'clock by the time the bell rings. So there's only a certain number of places you can get to in that amount of time and get back to WJ in time for class. And that's an idea of monopolistic competition. Now, there's lots of variety. I mean, I can get Chinese, I can get burrito bowls, I can get pizza, I can get Subway sandwiches, I can get a giant salad bar. I mean, there's lots of options. But there's only so many places in that vicinity that I can get back to in time to class in time for fifth period. And so the mall is a good example of this, because if you go to the mall, there's only so many stores that are in there, and the food court is a good example at Westfield. And if you look at the options that you have Cava, you have McDonald's, you have the variety of places that are there, and lots of variety in terms of food choices. But the idea here is there's only so many that can fit within the mall, and so it's very differentiated products. You have some control over the price that you can charge, but again, you price it too high and people won't shop there. So that is a bit of a problem. And then you have lower barriers to entry here. So it is very easy for a new firm to come in and start selling at the mall, just like it's now not as easy as it may be in other places. But in monopolistic competition, you gotta look at the circumstances, the physical presence in terms of where you are. And so there is a lot of non-price competition, this idea of advertising to get people to buy your product. And so while you have some market power over price, you have less so over the number of sellers that are in that space and who's coming and going as part of that. So again, we'll cover that one in chapter 16 when we get there a little later on. But we're going to focus now in this chapter on perfect competition. But that gives you a kind of a flavor of what the different market structures look like in order to better understand perfect competition in the short run and in the long run. And again, we're going to look at all four of these in the short run and long run over time. But today we're just going to focus on perfect competition and this idea of really being a price taker in the perfectly competitive market. Again, identical products. You really can't tell one bushel of corn from another bushel of corn, or milk, or strawberries. Not a whole lot of differentiation here at all. It's a very low barrier to entry in that any farmer can sell those items. You kind of take what the market will bear in terms of the prices that are available, and then you have people entering and exiting the market pretty often in terms of those, again, low barriers to entry in making that happen. So price taker for sure, no control over the prices that we see there. Now, why are they price takers? Well, again, if you're going to charge more than what the market is going to be selling it for, nobody's going to buy your product. They're going to buy everybody else's. And why would you not go lower? Because if you go lower, everybody's going to buy your product, and you're not going to have any left, and you may not cover all of your costs, variable costs, hopefully, but you're ultimately going to have to raise prices, or you're going to go out of business. So that's why in a perfectly competitive market, you charge what everybody else is charging. Why? Because you can, but secondly, because if you charge any higher, you're going to lose money. You're not going to be able to sell those items and make money off of it. So that really is leading to this horizontal or straight line for a perfectly elastic demand curve. And this leads us to this concept of a side-by-side graph. The idea here that we have a firm that is a price taker on the right side, the idea of the firms that are price takers, and the demand is essentially horizontal because it's perfectly elastic. But all of the firms in this market are represented with the graph you see on the left. All firms with the upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve. Where do they meet at equilibrium? It is at this $10 price, and that $10 price, because every firm that is in this industry is a price taker, that firm price of $10 is the demand curve for every firm that is out there. So what we have is a side-by-side graph, and side-by-side meaning all firms on one side, the firm on the other side. And it doesn't matter which way they are, but just be consistent in terms of labeling them so that whoever's grading it knows which one is the firm graph and which one is all of the firms, because that really does make a difference in terms of what we see here. So this gives rise to the idea of a side-by-side graph in that capacity. Okay, so that leads us to our key graph then, which is a side-by-side, perfectly competitive market in the long run. The idea here is that the demand curve, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, the demand curve is essentially this perfectly elastic or horizontal line that we see over here. It is established by all of the firms in the market, as we said, upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve, meeting at equilibrium, a price of P1, a quantity of Q1, and that becomes the market's price. Because you're a price taker, every firm in the market must align with that, okay? And so that's what we see here in terms of this demand. The price is the demand, and it's also the marginal revenue, thus giving us what we'll talk about in a second as Mr. DARP, this idea of marginal revenue, demand, average revenue, and price all being one curve, this horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve that we see here. Okay, and this means that they're making zero economic profit because our average total cost curve is intersecting Mr. DARP, and MC is intersecting ATC at that point at which they're all three intersecting together. MC equals MR determines the quantity, right? And that is our Q1, where MC equals MR. And this becomes our long-run equilibrium, the idea that we begin and end here. If we're going to go to short run, something's going to happen, and we'll talk about that. But we begin and end where ATC at its minimum intersects Mr. DARP, intersects this demand curve, the horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve that we see here. So a firm is a price taker. We established that. And as a result of this, again, the price is set by the industry. So what's the additional revenue? Well, every time it's $10, right? Every additional quantity you sell is $10 because that's what the market will bear. And this becomes the marginal revenue, the average revenue, the demand, and the price, Mr. DARP, Mr. DARP, and there he is, Mr. DARP. That is our perfectly elastic or horizontal demand curve. That is, again, with the side-by-side graph where we get this from, Mr. DARP. And it is set by the market, but every product that competitor sells is going to be $10. Why? Because that is what the market will bear, and they are price takers in terms of what we see there. So, for perfect competition, Mr. DARP is established as demand equals marginal revenue and average revenue and price. Because it's perfectly competitive, they all are on one horizontal line, okay? And because we are maximizing profit, we're going to look at where MC equals MR. And where is MC equals MR? It is right there where Mr. DARP meets MC and ATC at its minimum. So that is the quantity at which we would produce it. Why do we produce it there? Because we're maximizing profit. So that is why Mr. DARP is there, because the MR equals MC is what establishes that idea of maximizing profit. So in the short run, every business wants to make money. Their incentive is to be profitable. And so they're going to maximize their profits, and they're going to continue to produce until they can produce each new output to equal that additional cost. So if the price is $10, they're going to produce every additional unit they can until until that average revenue and that meets that ATC at MC equals MR. So because that is their price point, they're going to produce whatever quantity can be produced at where MC equals MR. That's going to maximize their profit. To produce more than that, ATC will rise. Marginal cost will be higher. That wouldn't be profitable. To maximize their profit, they're going to produce at where MC equals MR, and that is the optimal quantity at which they should produce. That is the profit maximizing rule. And now let's take a look at some examples where we might see this. So, putting cost and revenue together then to determine this profit, if we calculate where MC equals MR right here, we can see that this firm's ATC is actually lower than the cost. So they're making money. They're actually profiting in this particular sense because their MC equals MR is above the ATC at that particular quantity. Now, you remember, you got to take it straight down to the ATC line, and that from MC equals MR to determine that. And we can see here the ATC is less than what they're charging at $7. So they're making money. They are profitable as a result of this. Now, how much should be produced? Again, MC equals MR is going to determine this. And again, take that line straight through ATC. We can see that 9 should be produced here. What's our total revenue? Well, 9 times 7 is going to give us total revenue. And then our ATC, which is 9 times 5, would be subtracted from 63 in order to give us what our total revenue or our profit would be in the long run. So total revenue, $63. Total cost, $45. And then you can see the difference there, what, $18 in terms of the difference. Now, we can see again how that's laid out in terms of the total revenue. Again, 9 times 7, $63. We see total cost, 9 times 5, $45, and the difference is 18. As we discussed. So this firm is making money. MC equals MR, again, is the key point to determine how many quantity they should produce. How much should they actually produce? They produce it at MC equals MR. That really is the driver there. That's going to determine how we maximize our profit. And we're going to do that right there. So if the market demand falls and the price falls from $7 to $5, that's going to have an impact on our profitability. So again, MC equals MR still applies, but now the firm is going to make even less money because of this. So if the Mr. DARP falls to $5, you can see ATC is above it. MC equals MR is here at 7. We would only produce 7 of these. And you can see we're going to incur a loss as a result of this. So our revenue is 35. Our total cost is 42. We have a loss of $7 as a result of this price change. Now, depending on where AVC is, that may determine that we have to be in shutdown, where we shut down. And in this case, we don't know where AVC fell, but the idea is if the price is above AVC, then we would be okay. We would be able to continue. And in this one, we didn't have an AVC. But in looking at this, for the shutdown rule, if it's above AVC, we stay open. If it's below AVC, the price is below AVC, then we would be in shutdown condition. So in this example, when you're looking at this, the idea here is your minimum AVC is your shutdown point, because this starts the supply curve on the marginal cost curve. Everything above that is going to be your supply curve on that marginal cost curve. Everything below it would be in shutdown, so you wouldn't be producing here. In terms of what you would be producing, nothing here. You would be in shutdown condition. So price needs to be less than AVC, and you should shut down in that scenario. So in producing nothing, you're able to renegotiate and taking fixed costs as a loss. That's going to be cheaper than producing additional units and doing so with even greater losses that are going to be piling up for you. So important to keep in mind that profit maximizing rule, MC equals MR or MR equals MC. This applies to all of the market structures, not just perfectly competitive markets, but also monopolies, oligopolies, monopolistically competitive firms. The rule applies only if price is above AVC, because otherwise you're in shutdown condition. And then again, price is equal to marginal cost for perfectly competitive firms, because MR is price. So that's where MC equals MR. So your price is equal to your marginal cost. Again, that's because MC is equal to MR for profit maximization, and price is marginal revenue in that example, Mr. DARP. And so that's what you would see there in terms of that profit maximizing rule. Okay, there are some additional practice exercises for you to take that are in the chapter notes. We're not going to go through all of those here, but they are good for you to take a look at. We're going to move on to the short run supply curve and taking a look at what happens there, and then we'll look at long run. So looking at the short run supply curve, again, as the price increases, the quantity produced could also increase in terms of where you are because of the maximum quantity at MC equals MR. And so if the price were to be $15, we would be okay because we're meeting AVC, right? And if the price were $10, we'd be in shutdown. Anything above that, we can produce at MC equals MR. So if the price were to be $35, we would produce 9 items because MC equals MR here at 9. Okay, and then 9 times 35 would give us what our total revenue is. Now we'd take out costs, obviously, total cost being about, what, $30 there, so about $45 profit, but you would still be making money. So that's how we determine profit maximization, MC equals MR, and then take your total revenue minus your total costs to give you what your profit looks like. So MC above AVC, as we talked about, is the short run supply curve. And again, we see this kind of playing out. If that per unit tax is established, your supply curve is going to move inward. That's going to affect your AVC. And And if your price level is beneath that, then you may be in shutdown as a result of that. If there's a subsidy that's helping out, we see, the Coronavirus CARES Act, that kind of thing having an impact here, and that could help your business to lower the AVC and keep your doors open. And that is really critical if we can make that happen as well. So that's what we see here. Again, the subsidy shifting the supply curve outward or rightward, leading to a lower AVC. And if price is somewhere in there, then it could keep your doors open. That could mean the difference between whether a business stays open or whether it closes in the short run. Now, what happens to quantity if your fixed costs increase? This is an important point because what we see here is your average total costs will rise. We're still producing at MC equals MR. So again, depending on this, in this example, you're going to see MC equals MR is untouched by ATC. The fixed costs would be included in your ATC. Remember, your fixed cost curve is down here. And so just because this rose doesn't have an impact, I mean, it does have an impact on your profit, but not on your overall revenue. You're still making enough money here in order to stay in business because you're producing at MC equals MR, which is right here at this quantity F in this example. So MC equals MR takes you to this quantity. ATC is still beneath the price. You're still making money. You would not have a problem in terms of what you're producing because, again, that doesn't change where MC equals MR. Now, per unit versus lump sum is a really good point to point out here because we do see these from time to time on FRQs. A per unit tax is going to affect your variable costs, okay? A lump sum tax is going to affect fixed costs. So if there's one important point to know about per unit taxes versus lump sum is the idea that, the government's going to give you a subsidy or taxes you, and they're going to do it all at once. So it's not a per unit type of thing. That wouldn't affect variable costs. That would affect your fixed costs. And the idea there is only your average fixed cost and your average total costs would be shifting in a lump sum. Per unit tax, it's going to affect your variable costs. So that's going to hit MC, AVC, and ATC in terms of shifting curves. And you're going to see those play out pretty significantly there as well. Okay, so make sure you remember the difference between per unit and lump sum. Per unit is going to affect variable costs. Lump sum is going to affect fixed costs, and that's an important point in terms of differences. Fixed cost is changing ATC and AFC, again, because the fixed costs, just like the tax, the lump sum tax, is changing your average total cost and your average fixed cost, but it's not going to affect marginal cost. Only variable costs would do that. And again, more on that in Krugman if you want to delve down into the details, or email me if you have questions. So drawing these curves side by side then, what we see here is, take a look. Based on this, is the firm making a profit or a loss? And why do you think that is? So just think about that in your head for a moment. Where do we produce? We produce at MC equals MR. In this case, for the firm, which is the graph over to the right, it says firm, we get the price based on the industry, which establishes, upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve, meeting at a price level of 15. And $15 is the price because they're price takers in a perfectly competitive market. So $15 is the price. That's Mr. DARP. And MC equals MR is where we maximize profit. So we're going to produce at MC equals MR. This is at a quantity of 8. Our ATC is beneath that number, beneath that Mr. DARP marginal revenue number. And so this firm is making a profit. They are making money. Their average total costs are lower than the revenue they are bringing in. Therefore, they are making money. And so if you weren't able to take a look at that, go back and watch the video we just went through on calculating the differences based on the revenue and costs to determine the profit in that particular example. And then looking at this, where is the profit maximization point? Again, you're going to produce where MC equals MR. Okay, how do we know? Because we know Mr. DARP is right here. Mr. DARP. Many times it's MR equals P or MR equals D, but again, they're all the same. MR equals demand equals average revenue equals price, and MC equals MR is the universal in every competitive type of market, whether it's perfect competition or monopoly or whatever, imperfect or perfect. MC equals MR is where you determine the quantity at which you maximize profit. So in this case, we're producing 10. Average total cost is down here. All of this from the average total cost up to the Mr. DARP is going to be profit. Everything beneath this is going to be total costs. This would be your fixed costs, and from here down your variable costs. And notice marginal cost is rising. Your supply curve starts right here in terms of what you're able to supply, where AVC is intersected by marginal cost at its minimum. So what output should be produced? Well, you should produce 10, MC equals MR. What's the total revenue? 10 times 20, $200. What is the total cost? Well, in this case, 10 times 15, $150 is your total cost. You make a profit of $50. Is it a profit? It is a profit. It is not a loss. What is the shutdown point? Well, your shutdown point would be if you're not able to make AVC, which would be something below like 12. So if your price fell below 12, you would be in shutdown condition in terms of something happening there. And that leads us to our final two graphs in this particular model. So here is an example where ATC is above Mr. DARP. So you have what's called a negative profit or a loss. This negative profit or a loss is a short run graph, because remember, as we talked about in the last graph, long run is only when ATC meets Mr. DARP at its minimum, where MC intersects that ATC curve. This is not that case. So this is a short run side-by-side graph. And that's what we see here. ATC, again, we produce at MC equals MR, which is right here. MC equals MR, take this curve, this quantity 1, all the way up to the ATC, and we can see this is the negative profit that we have incurred because our costs exceed our revenues. So that is negative profit. And again, depending on where AVC is, if it's below Mr. DARP, great. If it's above Mr. DARP, then you're probably in shutdown condition. But that's the idea of a negative profit. Now let's flip that graph and go to our fourth and final graph in this chapter, which is key graph 33, looking at a profitable situation, much like what we saw in the previous examples, where MC equals MR determines our quantity, Mr. DARP meeting marginal cost at Q1, and the ATC intersects this quantity below Mr. DARP, which tells us their costs are lower than their revenues. So they are making a profit. And again, this is also short run, because remember, the only time it's long run is where ATC hits Mr. DARP at its minimum, where MC intersects ATC at its minimum. That would be long run. Any other examples where ATC is not intersecting Mr. DARP and MC at that same point would be short run, not long run. So that's how you know that you have long run. And going back to that key graph really quick for a second, this would be long run equilibrium. ATC is meeting Mr. DARP at its minimum. MC intersecting ATC at its minimum where it meets Mr. DARP. That's long run equilibrium. The other two, the last two graphs that we looked at would be short run, because ATC is not meeting Mr. DARP at that minimum ATC. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this. So how do we get from this short run, what's happening in these two key graphs, to get us to long run? Okay, we're going to look at wheat farming and profitability in making corn. So what do you do in the long run? Well, a great point. If you're a wheat farmer and you're losing money in the long run, you're going to join whatever crop is making money. And we see farmers do this all the time. They do crop rotation. Well, there's a reason why they rotate their crops. It's not just for the ground and the nutrients in the fields. It's also because of profitability. Firms are going, and farms are the same way. They're going to enter if there's money to be made. Hey, there's money in soybeans. Go grow those this year. Or they'll leave the market if there's a loss. Hey, corn is really taking a dive. Don't plant corn. So we see firms, just like farms, will enter or leave if there is a profit or a loss, respectively. Everybody's going to break even, so there's no economic profit. The idea is it's zero or normal profit, which is break-even status. And the idea is it is very efficient, and we'll talk at the end here about that efficiency. because everybody's breaking even. Everybody in the market who wanted to be in the market is breaking even, that survived in the long run. And so they are all breaking even. They've all been successful. Doesn't mean they'll be successful next year, but it means for the here and now, they are successful. And that is this idea of Mr. DARP meeting ATC at its minimum, where MC intersects ATC at its minimum. All three of those meet, Mr. DARP, MC, and ATC meeting at this point. This is long run. So anytime you see ATC intersected by MC at Mr. DARP, you know that this graph is long run versus short run. If ATC is off of Mr. DARP and up here or down here, you know it is short run, because something else is going to happen to take us back to long run. So the idea here is at this long run, there's no incentive to leave. There's no incentive to join this industry, because everybody's making enough money to cover their costs, and that's it. Okay, they've been able to make the money that they had to pay out in order to pay their bills. They've paid all their bills. They've paid all their workers, and they have nothing left over. So they have been efficient in this economic sense. They are efficient in using all of their resources effectively. But the idea is they are in long run. So what happens if we're not in long run, and how do we get back there? And this is the idea of going from short run to long run. ACDC Econ also has an explainer video on this. If you don't like my version or you need another version, I always recommend you take a look at a different perspective. I think you'll find that helpful. But the idea here is, are we in short run or long run? Hopefully you can tell that we are in short run. And the reason is because ATC is not meeting Mr. DARP at its minimum ATC, where MC intersects it. So here we're in short run. This business is actually making money. There's a profit here. You can see the green box, because again, MC equals MR determines the quantity. Take it down to ATC, and you can see here that the quantity of 8 is producing a profit. They're making more money off of $15 per item than their costs are. Maybe it's 12 or something. And so what's going to happen to this industry is that more firms are going to see, hey, this is a perfectly competitive market. Why can't I join? And the answer is they can join. So what's going to happen is, watch the graph on the left. In this particular case, what we're going to see is the supply curve is going to move outward. And the reason is because more firms are going to join the industry, saying, hey, they made a profit. I want to make money too. So the supply curve shifts here. Demand moving along the curve down to a lower price level, and this lower price level at $10 becomes the new Mr. DARP. This new Mr. DARP, as a result of what we see here, is meeting ATC at its minimum and leaving us with a new long-run equilibrium at a $10 price. Now the firms that are remaining have broken even once again. All of those profits have been eaten up by the new firms that have joined and the old firms that were there, and so everybody's breaking even once again. And this is the idea of normal profit in the long run. Zero economic profit or normal profit, same thing. And in the long run, ATC is meeting Mr. DARP at its minimum, where MC is intersecting ATC at its minimum. And that's what we see there. That's the idea of going from short run to long run. Now, let's take another example and do this again. Is this short run or long run? Hopefully by now it doesn't take you as long to figure that out. So it is short run, because here again, ATC is not meeting Mr. DARP at its minimum. So what are firms going to do in the long run? In order to get us back to long run, firms are going to leave the market. In this case, notice MC equals MR determines the quantity, and the costs exceed the revenues, meaning there's a loss here. People are losing money, thus the red box. People are losing money. In economics, red is usually not a good color. It means you're losing money. And green, good color, means you're making money. Red usually means you're losing money. And the idea here is that firms are going to leave because they're losing money. They can't keep their doors open. Maybe their AVC is above Mr. DARP. So the supply curve on the left here for the industry is going to shift leftward or inward. And the demand is going to move along the curve to a higher price level because firms are leaving the market. They can't stay in business. They're losing money as a result of this. So demand is moving along the demand curve to this new supply curve and establishing this $20 price, which ultimately becomes the new Mr. DARP. at this $20 level. Now, firms are now meeting ATC at its minimum again, Mr. DARP at its minimum. Mr. DARP meeting ATC at its minimum, where MC intersects it. And now we have a new price level at which all of these firms are breaking even once again. So now we've gone from short run to long run, and we can see with the shift in the supply curve in both directions now, we get to a new price level which changes the Mr. DARP and leads ATC back to zero economic profit. Now, let's go from long run to long run. So we go from long run to short run and back to long run again. And this is a realistic approach in terms of, and again, remember, long run doesn't always mean the same time period, so it can vary. But the idea here is we have a situation in which we are starting at long run. You can see ATC meets Mr. DARP at its minimum. And in this industry, well, we've got demand increasing. In this particular example, so maybe a taste and preference has shifted over time. Supply curve is going to move along the curve to the new demand curve and create a new Mr. DARP at that higher price level of $20. Now, because of the profit that's being made in this industry as a result of that demand curve shift, notice that more firms in a perfectly competitive environment are going to step in, and that's going to shift the supply curve. So demand curve is shifting and leading to a higher price level. Now supply curve is also shifting rightward, leading to an even the idea here of taking it up to the D1 and S1 equilibrium in terms of what we see here for the industry. So notice with demand curve shifting and supply curve shifting, what we end up with here is taking us back to a new Mr. DARP at $20, where we were at 25 before because of the profits that were eaten up by the new firms that have joined, as well as the old ones that remained. We had a supply curve and a demand curve shifting, leading us to this $20 price level. So again, now we're back to long run, because the idea here is MR meets ATC, Mr. DARP meets ATC at its minimum. Now, that is the idea of taking us back to long run equilibrium. So just to take us through that really quickly again, the idea is we start out here at long run. Mr. DARP meets ATC at its minimum. We have a demand increasing, which is going to lead to a higher price level. We're going to make profits as a result of this. As a result of those profits, more companies are going to join because they want to make that money too. And so that's going to lead to a supply curve shift, which takes us, again, with the supply curve shifting, that's going to take that price, which we thought was going to be up at 25, now down to 20, because more suppliers in the marketplace. And that returns us back to long run. So a lot of things happening there, to long run to short run, back to long run. But the idea is ATC is back to Mr. DARP at its minimum, and therefore we are back to long run equilibrium. So important to note, the price in the long run did increase. It is an increasing cost industry. The long run supply is going to be upward sloping in terms of the impact that it's having here. Because again, if the demand is moving, it's going to lead to more profits for the industry, and then suppliers are going to say, hey, I want a piece of the pie too. And so that's going to lead to a stabilization of the price, but again, in an increasing cost industry, the long run supply is going to be upward sloping in that regard. Now, firms are going to enter to earn profit. The idea is supply is increasing in that industry. Price is going to come down a bit because of that supply being added. And it's going to lead us back to, again, long run where Mr. DARP meets ATC at its minimum. And that really is the idea of going from long run to short run and back to long run again. Okay, one more thing before we close on this chapter, and that is the idea of efficiency. You've heard me mention this from time to time. There are two types of efficiency that we look at in economics. This idea of productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. What do we mean by that? Well, efficiency is this idea of using all of your resources, okay? The whole idea of making sure that you're using all of your resources up, that there aren't leftovers, but also that you don't have shortages, that there aren't inefficiencies in the market that lead to higher costs, and as a result lead to people leaving the industry not because of competition or because of negative profits, but because of the fact that there were inefficiencies in the market. So perfectly competitive structures are really efficient in doing both of these types of efficiency. So let's talk about what the differences are between productive and allocative. So productive efficiency is this idea of price is equal to minimum ATC. So you are producing at the lowest possible cost, okay? And that is where Mr. DARP meets ATC at its minimum. So that is productively efficient. Now, to be allocatively efficient is where price meets marginal cost. Now, in the long run, notice that all of these come together at the same optimal quantity. So when we're maximizing profitability in the long run, ATC is intersecting Mr. DARP at its minimum, and MC, ATC, and Mr. DARP are all meeting at the same place. So we are productively and allocatively efficient. But allocative efficiency is the idea that you're producing what society wants at the amount that society wants. And that goes back to the idea of, again, MC equals MR. So in a perfectly competitive market, if you're producing at MC equals MR, you are essentially allocatively efficient because you are producing where marginal cost meets your price, and Mr. DARP is that price, and so MC equals MR essentially is, in the long run, is productively and allocatively efficient. Now, in the short run, you may not see ATC at its minimum, of course, and so that wouldn't be productively efficient, but we get back there because, again, other firms will enter or exit the marketplace in order to bring us back to that efficiency. So let's take a closer look at that. So in this example, you can see that we are not productively efficient. Notice that MC equals MR. ATC is not at its minimum meeting Mr. DARP. So we know that we are not productively efficient here because of that. We're making it at the lowest possible cost, but not average total cost at the lowest point, and therefore it's not productively efficient. It is, however, allocatively efficient in that we are producing at MC equals P. The idea here at marginal cost meets the price. That is that is allocatively efficient in terms of allocating resources society wants, but it's not productively efficient because minimum ATC is not meeting Mr. DARP or price in that particular example. Now notice in this example, we also have a situation in which we are not productively efficient. Why? Again, because we're producing at MC equals MR, and in this example, ATC is above that. And so if we are producing at MC equals MR, and which is quantity 2, and the costs are above us, well, at this point, we're productively efficient in producing what society wants, but we're not, we're allocatively efficient at producing what society wants, but not productively, because we're at MC equals price, but not at minimum ATC equals price. And so this would not be productive. We're not using our resources effectively, even though we are producing what's the quantity that society wants, we're not doing it cost effectively. And that's causing negative profits or losses. Now, in this example, we do see productive efficiency in the long run, again, because minimum ATC is meeting Mr. DARP at MC, and that is MC equals MR, the quantity at which we should be producing, Q3. All of these come together. In the long run, this is the definition of the long run, all three curves meeting together at Mr. DARP meeting MC at where it intersects ATC at its minimum. That is allocatively and productively efficient. Now let's flip it and look at where we have some other examples. This idea of allocatively efficient, I kind of mentioned this. This is productively inefficient, but allocatively we are producing where MC equals price. And so in this example, we are allocatively efficient. We have allocated the resources society wants. In this example, we are not. If we are producing at Q2, then we are not producing what society would want us to produce. They would want us to produce here at Q3. But because we are not allocatively efficient. Now, we don't know where ATC is on this. It's saying that it is here. And so at that point, it looks like it's neither productive nor allocatively efficient in that model. And then back in long run, we are productively and allocatively efficient, again, where Mr. DARP meets ATC at its minimum. And marginal cost is always intersecting ATC at its minimum, so we can see all three curves are intersecting there at Q3. And MC equals MR is where we conduct profit maximization. We maximize our profitability there, and we do that at Mr. DARP meets MC, or MC equals MR. Okay, it's important to note perfectly competitive firms should be allocatively and productively efficient if they're in the long run. Otherwise, they're not in the long run. In the short run, they're always going to be allocatively efficient, producing what society wants, but not necessarily productively efficient. And so that's what we tend to see in those firms and those key graphs. So taking a look at the key graphs one more time, we have a shutdown condition here. We're producing at MC equals MR, ATC and AVC above it. We're not able to meet our AVC, so we are in shutdown condition. How do we determine what a price a firm charges? Well, they are price takers in a perfectly competitive market. So Mr. DARP is established by the market with that upward sloping supply curve and downward sloping demand curve at equilibrium. The price P1 travels over to Mr. DARP, creating this long run equilibrium where Mr. DARP intersects ATC at its minimum because MC intersects ATC at its minimum. That establishes MC equals MR, the quantity at which we would maximize profits at Q1. And every firm is earning zero or normal economic profit because they are price takers. Now in this example, this is short run because there's a negative profit or a loss being incurred. So we can see here Mr. DARP is below ATC. Depending on where AVC is, this firm may be leaving the market as a result of the losses that they see here. So what would happen? In that case, supply curve would shift leftward, leading to a higher price, and then P2 being established up here to take Mr. DARP up to ATC, and then we would be back to long run. The same is true in this last key graph example, where they're earning profits. In this case, we are not productively efficient, because we are producing at MC equals MR, but ATC is not at its minimum, so this is not productively, although allocatively efficient. So what's going to happen here? Well, other firms are going to join. The supply curve is going to shift outward or rightward, leading to a lower price level down here at P3. That price level is going to eat up those profits, and it's going to meet the new price at P3 is going to meet ATC at its minimum. And so then we would be producing here at Q0, I guess, in that example. And again, we would be productively and allocatively efficient if that were to happen. But this is short run. That would be long run in terms of how that plays out. All right, some key terms for you to notice. Notice I also included the page numbers on this one. Hope you find that helpful. You can pause the video or look at the chapter notes there in order to take a deeper dive into what you're seeing there. Notice that applying it to your business, you're a price-taking producer. So what are you going to do in a perfectly competitive market? Are you meeting your average variable costs? How will you know when you're in shutdown condition? And how do you know when you have your optimal output? How much should you be producing in order to maximize profits? How do you determine profitability or break-even status, or when you're incurring a loss? What's the difference between a short-run and long-run equilibrium in your market? And are you able to take advantage of those profits in the short run? Is there a lot of competition coming in to eat up those profits in the long run, in the short run, and leaving your business vulnerable? How does it affect the way you do business? All things to think about on the entrepreneurship side in terms of applying this to how business owners use it every day. And I hope you find that helpful. Here are the answers to the take-home quiz, the practice sets. You can pause this again here to take a look at the answers that are here. They've also been posted to the modules section of my MCPS Classroom. And I hope you found this video helpful. I know it was a lot of content, a lot of information to be taking you through, but I hope you find it helpful in looking at perfect competition. We will be back in the next chapter taking a look at monopolies, our first chapter on imperfectly competitive markets, and I hope you'll join me then.